My name is Joshua Anderson. For the last 15 years, I've been the oldest son who had to step up after our father passed away too soon. I became the rock for the entire family. I worked long hours as a construction engineer, put my own life on hold, and made sure everyone had what they needed. Eventually, I was the one who bought us a nice warm house right here in Boise so we could finally stop renting and live comfortably together. I never asked for thanks. I just wanted my family to be okay. But on the night of the memorial birthday party we hold every year to remember my late father, everything changed. Right there in the middle of what was supposed to be a respectful gathering, I was publicly betrayed by my own brother. The words I overheard and the things said out loud in front of everyone hit me harder than anything I've ever experienced. My mother tried to speak up for me, but it didn't matter. The selfishness and the entitlement that came out that night revealed truths I never wanted to believe about the people closest to me. I stood there listening, feeling the ground shift under my feet. All those years of sacrifice, all the money I poured in to keep the family stable, suddenly felt like they meant nothing. That single evening turned into the moment I realized I had been taken for granted for far too long. And when the full weight of their intentions finally sank in, I made a quiet decision right then and there. This is the story of how one betrayal at my father's memorial birthday party forced me to stop everything, how I finally exposed the truth and took back control of my life. If you've ever been used by your own family or felt like you were the only one carrying everyone else, then you need to hear what happened next. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single part of this story. The house we finally owned in Boise quickly became the center of our everyday routines. Mornings began with the usual sounds of the kitchen as I prepared for another day at the construction engineering firm. I would review project plans over coffee while the rest of the family gradually woke up. My younger brother Nicholas worked in sales for a regional distribution company, but the commissions varied wildly depending on monthly targets. He often returned home frustrated after long drives to meet clients, sharing stories of deals that fell through at the last minute. His wife Samantha stayed home to look after their son Ethan, managing school schedules and after-school soccer practices with precision. She kept the household running smoothly, from organizing laundry to planning weekly groceries, and she frequently brought up small but necessary purchases during our evening conversations. Those dinners around the large table became the highlight of each day. My mother Susan prepared simple but satisfying meals like roasted vegetables and baked chicken, and we would talk about ordinary things, work deadlines, school projects, and weekend plans. Samantha would mention items that needed attention, such as new school supplies for Ethan or replacement parts for the family car. I listened carefully and transferred funds from my account the same night, seeing it as a way to keep everything stable without creating tension. Nicholas appreciated the help, often nodding in relief when I confirmed the payment had gone through. My sister Kayla, who taught third grade at the elementary school just a few miles away, joined us for many of those meals. She lived in a small apartment nearby and brought lively stories about her students and classroom activities. Kayla had a keen eye for family dynamics and would sometimes pull me aside after dinner to comment on how much Nicholas seemed to count on the extra support. I always told her it was part of being the oldest and that the house had given us all a foundation we never had before. Deep inside, I felt a steady sense of fulfillment knowing my long hours at the firm were creating this kind of security for everyone. Weekends followed their own comfortable pattern. We often drove to one of the nearby parks along the river where Ethan could run freely on the grass while the adults sat on benches discussing light topics. Nicholas would suggest small family outings, and Samantha would add ideas for things that would make the day more enjoyable. I covered the costs for gas, snacks, and entry fees without hesitation, viewing these moments as rewards for the years of sacrifice. Samantha spoke directly to me on several occasions, saying things like, "Nicholas is fortunate to have your backing, though." Her words carried an underlying expectation that the support would continue indefinitely. I accepted it as her way of acknowledging the role I played. As the seasons shifted and summer gave way to cooler autumn air, the family began turning their attention to the annual memorial birthday party we held to remember my late father. Susan took the lead in planning the menu, listing traditional dishes she knew everyone enjoyed. Nicholas offered to handle the invitations for our extended relatives, while Samantha focused on decorations and ensuring the living room and backyard looked presentable. Kayla volunteered to bake the cake and help arrange the seating so that everyone would have space to gather comfortably. Ethan grew excited about the event, asking questions about the games we might play and the stories we would share about his grandfather. I participated in the preparations by taking care of the larger expenses such as extra groceries and any last-minute supplies.
The atmosphere in the house felt upbeat and collaborative as the date approached.
Nicholas and Samantha discussed details late into the evenings, and Susan smiled more often than I had seen in years. Kayla and I exchanged glances across the table, both sensing the positive energy building around the gathering. The entire family looked forward to the celebration with genuine anticipation, treating it as a meaningful tradition that brought us closer together in the home we now shared. The final days before the party passed in a flurry of small tasks. Susan tested recipes in the kitchen, Nicholas confirmed the guest list, and Samantha arranged flowers she had picked up from the local market. Ethan practiced a short poem he wanted to recite, and the house filled with the scent of baked goods and fresh linens. I completed my own contributions by ensuring the backyard lights worked properly and the driveway had enough parking space for everyone. The mood remained light and focused, with everyone contributing in their own way. By the time the weekend of the party arrived, the house felt alive with purpose. Conversations during the last dinner before the event centered entirely on final touches and who would arrive first. Samantha reminded Nicholas to pick up the beverages on his way home from work, and he agreed without complaint. Susan expressed quiet satisfaction that the gathering would honor my father in the way he deserved. Kayla offered to arrive early to help set up tables, and Ethan bounced with excitement about seeing his cousins. I watched it all unfold, content that my efforts had created this space for the family to come together. The anticipation hung in the air as we wrapped up the final preparations that evening. Everyone retired to bed with thoughts of the next day, the house quiet, except for the occasional creak of floorboards. The routine that had defined our life in Boise felt complete, and the upcoming memorial birthday party promised to be a highlight of the year. The morning of the memorial birthday party arrived with clear autumn skies over Boise. I woke up early to double-check the backyard setup and make sure the extra chairs were arranged properly around the patio. Susan moved between the kitchen and dining room, finalizing the food trays with practiced efficiency. Nicholas returned from a quick errand with the last-minute beverages, placing them in the cooler while chatting about the expected number of guests. Samantha directed the placement of tablecloths and centerpieces, adjusting each item until everything looked neat and inviting. Kayla arrived right on time, carrying the finished cake, carefully setting it on the side table, and offering to help with last preparations. Ethan bounced around the house in his clean clothes, asking repeatedly when the first relatives would show up. By midday, the first guests began pulling into the driveway. Extended family members greeted each other warmly in the living room, sharing updates about their jobs and recent travels. I circulated among them, exchanging handshakes and brief conversations while keeping an eye on the overall flow. Nicholas handled the music playlist from his phone, selecting softer tracks that suited the occasion. Samantha moved gracefully between groups, smiling as she offered drinks and made sure no one felt left out. Susan stayed close to the food table, encouraging everyone to try the dishes she had prepared with care. Kayla stayed near me for much of the afternoon, occasionally commenting on how well the gathering seemed to be going. As the party progressed into the late afternoon, the energy remained steady and respectful. Small groups formed in the living room and backyard, with conversations drifting between memories of my father and current family news. Ethan played quietly with a few cousins on the grass, their laughter drifting through the open windows. Nicholas and Samantha stood together near the patio door, at one point speaking in low tones while glancing toward the main gathering area. I stepped inside to refill a water pitcher from the kitchen, passing through the hallway without drawing attention. That was when I heard their voices coming from the kitchen area, partially obscured by the open doorway. Samantha spoke first, her tone direct and matter-of-fact as she addressed Susan. She mentioned the ongoing financial pressures and how certain arrangements had become unsustainable over time. Nicholas added a few comments, agreeing with her points, emphasizing the need for changes moving forward. Susan responded quietly, trying to steer the discussion toward appreciation for the support that had been provided and suggesting patience during the family gathering. Samantha countered firmly, stating that expectations needed to be adjusted sooner rather than later. The exchange continued for several minutes, with Samantha using phrases that highlighted her view on long-term dependencies. I remained just outside the doorway, frozen in place as the words registered. The conversation revealed layers of dissatisfaction that had not surfaced in our daily routines. Nicholas backed his wife's perspective without hesitation, while Susan attempted to mediate with gentle reminders about family unity. Samantha's replies stayed consistent in tone, addressing both her husband and mother-in-law by their first names when making her points. The discussion grew slightly more pointed as Samantha expressed that certain contributions should no longer be taken for granted. Before I could decide whether to step away or enter the kitchen, footsteps approached from the living room. Kayla appeared in the hallway, noticing my expression and quietly asking if everything was all right. I motioned for her to listen briefly without saying anything. The voices from the kitchen continued now, including more specific references to household responsibilities and future planning. Susan tried once more to calm the exchange, but Samantha maintained her stance clearly. Nicholas supported her position, speaking in a way that showed alignment with his wife's outlook. The party continued outside with guests unaware of the tension building in the background. Ethan ran past the hallway at one moment, calling out for more juice, momentarily breaking the intensity. Samantha and Nicholas eventually moved back toward the main area, their expressions composed as they rejoined the gathering. Susan followed a minute later, her face showing quiet concern but saying nothing further in that moment. Kayla and I exchanged a brief look before returning to the guests, both choosing to keep the incident private for the time being. As evening approached, the party maintained its surface warmth. More stories were shared, plates were cleared, and the cake was served amid appreciative comments. I participated outwardly while the earlier conversation replayed in my mind. The contrast between the public celebration and the private exchange in the kitchen created an undercurrent that only a few of us could feel. The gathering continued until the last guests began saying their goodbyes, leaving the house quieter but far from settled. As the evening light faded over the backyard, the party entered its later stage with guests still mingling comfortably. Several relatives had moved inside to the living room where the atmosphere stayed warm and conversational. I tried to maintain a normal expression while helping clear a few plates from the patio tables. Samantha and Nicholas positioned themselves near the center of the gathering, speaking with different family members in turn. Susan stayed close by, occasionally offering more dessert or refilling drinks with a composed smile. Kayla remained nearby, her glances toward me, showing quiet awareness of the earlier tension. Ethan had settled down with his cousins, showing them a simple card game on the floor. The shift happened gradually during one of the casual group conversations. Nicholas raised his voice just enough to draw attention from those nearby, mentioning how the family had relied on consistent support for household matters over recent years. Samantha joined in, smoothly adding that certain long-standing arrangements needed reevaluation because they created imbalance. She addressed the group directly, stating that it was time to discuss practical changes without waiting any longer. Nicholas nodded in agreement, reinforcing her points by talking about the weight of ongoing responsibilities and the need for everyone to contribute more equally moving forward. Susan attempted to intervene calmly, suggesting that the memorial gathering was not the right moment for such topics, and reminding everyone of the importance of staying united. Her words carried a gentle tone as she looked between her sons. Samantha responded without hesitation, turning towards Susan and saying, "Nicholas and I have thought about this carefully, Susan. We can't keep depending on the same pattern forever." Her voice remained steady and matter-of-fact, using her mother-in-law's first name in a way that underscored her seriousness. Nicholas backed her immediately, adding that the current setup had become unsustainable and that adjustments were necessary for the family's future stability. The words landed heavily in the room. A few relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances while others stayed silent, unsure how to respond. Samantha continued, emphasizing that expectations around financial help had grown too one-sided and that it was only fair to address it openly now. She spoke with clear conviction, directing parts of her comments toward me without using my name directly at first. Nicholas supported every point, describing how the Reliance had limited their own planning and independence. Susan tried once more to redirect the conversation, her voice softening as she urged them to consider the timing and the presence of extended family. Samantha countered firmly, "We've held back long enough, Susan. This affects our daily life too much to ignore." Kayla stepped forward at that moment, her tone sharp as she addressed both Nicholas and Samantha. She pointed out that the support provided had come from genuine care and sacrifice, not obligation, and that bringing it up this way during the memorial party showed poor judgment. Samantha turned to face her, directly maintaining her position without raising her voice, but making it clear she stood by her earlier statements. The exchange grew more direct, with Samantha reiterating that practical realities could no longer be overlooked. Nicholas sided completely with his wife, stating that he agreed with her assessment and that changes needed to happen. I finally spoke up, my voice steady despite the surge of disbelief. I asked them plainly why this discussion had to occur right then, in front of everyone on a day meant to honor our father. Samantha met my gaze and replied without apology, explaining that the issues had built up over time and delaying them further served no purpose. Her words carried an underlying sense of entitlement that made the betrayal feel even sharper. Nicholas added that he felt the same and that honesty in the moment was necessary. Susan looked visibly distressed, attempting to place herself between us while repeating that family should not air differences publicly like this. Her efforts to calm the situation had little effect as Samantha and Nicholas remained aligned in their stance. Ethan, who had been watching from the edge of the room, walked closer and asked in a small voice what was happening. The question hung in the air, highlighting how the confrontation had spilled beyond the adults. Samantha glanced at her son briefly before returning her focus to the discussion, while Nicholas shifted uncomfortably but did not back down. The other guests began murmuring among themselves, the earlier warmth of the party now replaced by awkward tension. The confrontation continued for several more minutes, with Samantha pressing her points about fairness and long-term independence. She addressed Nicholas by his first name several times when reinforcing their shared view, and referred to Susan as Susan when countering her attempts to mediate. Kayla stood her ground, defending the contributions that had kept the household stable. I felt the full weight of the public betrayal settle in as more details emerged in their statements. The gathering that had started with respect for my late father had transformed into something entirely different. By the time the last words were spoken, the room felt heavier. Guests started making excuses to leave earlier than planned, offering brief goodbyes as they headed to their cars. Susan remained quiet afterward, her expression showing a mix of disappointment and helplessness. Kayla stayed close, her presence a silent show of support. Nicholas and Samantha collected a few items without further comment, their faces set in determination. The house emptied gradually, leaving behind the remnants of what was supposed to be a meaningful evening. The house felt unusually quiet once the last guest had driven away. I stood in the living room for several minutes, staring at the scattered plates and half-empty glasses that remained on the tables. Susan moved slowly through the space, gathering napkins without speaking much. Kayla helped clear the backyard, her movements deliberate as she folded chairs and stacked them against the fence. Nicholas and Samantha stayed in the kitchen area, talking in low voices while loading the dishwasher. Ethan had already gone upstairs to his room, the earlier excitement replaced by confusion after witnessing the exchange. I finally walked into the kitchen and faced them directly. The words came out measured but firm as I asked why they had chosen to bring up those issues so publicly during a day meant to remember our father. Samantha turned from the sink, meeting my eyes without hesitation. She replied that the timing might have been unfortunate, but the concerns were real and had been building for a long time. Nicholas stood beside her, nodding, as he added that they both felt the current situation limited their ability to plan independently. Samantha continued explaining that relying on the same level of assistance year after year had created unrealistic expectations on their side. She addressed me calmly, stating that it was better to be honest now than to let resentment grow quietly. Susan stepped closer, her voice soft but urgent as she urged them to reconsider their approach and remember the support that had kept the household stable. Samantha responded by turning toward her mother-in-law and saying, "Susan, we appreciate what has been done, but Nicholas and I need to stand on our own feet eventually." Her tone carried the same steady conviction from earlier, using her mother-in-law's first name to emphasize the point. Nicholas reinforced her words, mentioning specific areas where the ongoing help had affected their budgeting decisions. The conversation grew more direct as Samantha listed several instances where she felt the balance had tipped too far in one direction. Kayla entered the kitchen at that moment, setting down a stack of folded tablecloths. She confronted them both, pointing out that the public setting had turned a private matter into something hurtful for the entire family. Samantha faced her without backing down, replying that avoiding the topic would only delay necessary changes. Nicholas sided with his wife again, stating that he stood behind her view completely. Susan tried once more to mediate, suggesting they sit down the next day to discuss calmly, but Samantha shook her head and said Susan waiting won't make the reality any different. I felt a cold clarity settle over me as their positions became fully clear. All the years of covering mortgage payments, utilities, and extra expenses suddenly appeared in a new light. I told them quietly that I had heard enough and that I would be stopping the additional financial support starting immediately. Samantha's expression shifted slightly, but she responded that such a sudden change would create real difficulties for their household. Nicholas echoed her concern, asking if I was serious about withdrawing help so abruptly. I confirmed that the decision was final after what had unfolded that evening. Later that night, after everyone had gone to their rooms, I sat at the desk in my bedroom and drafted a detailed email. I addressed it to the entire family, listing the total amount I had contributed toward the house and other expenses over the past several years, more than $120,000 in direct payments and mortgage assistance. I attached copies of bank transfer records and the informal agreement notes we had made when I first helped with the down payment. The message stated clearly that I expected repayment according to the original understanding and that I would pursue legal options if necessary. I sent the email just before midnight, then closed the laptop without waiting for replies. The following days brought a flood of responses. Susan called me privately, expressing worry about the growing division and asking if there was any room to reconsider. Kayla sent a short message of support saying she understood my position completely. Nicholas replied with a lengthy email defending their perspective and questioning the necessity of formal repayment. Samantha's response came separately, stating that the demand felt overly harsh given the family context and that they needed time to adjust their budget. She addressed Nicholas in her message as well, referring to him by his first name when discussing their joint situation. I met with Mr. Thompson, a local attorney in Boise who specialized in family financial disputes, 2 days later. He reviewed the transfer records and the email chain, confirming that the contributions could be treated as recoverable loans under state guidelines. He advised preparing formal demand letters and gathering additional documentation from the bank. I instructed him to proceed with the necessary paperwork to protect my interests. Throughout the week, the house remained tense. Nicholas and Samantha kept mostly to themselves, speaking in hushed tones whenever they passed through common areas. Susan tried to maintain normal routines, but her attempts at conversation often fell short. Kayla visited more frequently, offering quiet encouragement and helping with small tasks around the property. I focused on my work at the construction firm, channeling the disappointment into longer hours on current projects. The betrayal from the party had crystallized into a firm resolve that I would no longer carry the financial burden alone. The decision brought a strange sense of relief mixed with sadness. For the first time in years, I began considering what my own future might look like without the constant responsibility for everyone else's stability. The path ahead felt uncertain but necessary after the events of that evening. The weeks following the email brought a noticeable shift in the daily atmosphere inside the house. Nicholas and Samantha began avoiding shared spaces as much as possible, taking meals upstairs or leaving early for errands. Susan tried to bridge the growing distance by preparing larger breakfasts and suggesting family conversations, but her efforts met with short replies. Kayla continued visiting regularly, sometimes staying overnight in the guest room to offer a buffer between the conflicting sides. I maintained my routine at the construction firm, focusing on site inspections and project deadlines to keep my mind occupied. Mr. Thompson contacted me with updates on the formal demand letters sent to Nicholas and Samantha. The documents outlined the exact total $120,000 in documented transfers and mortgage contributions, along with a reasonable repayment schedule based on their combined income. Samantha replied through her own attorney, arguing that the payments had been gifts rather than loans, and that enforcing repayment would create undue hardship. Nicholas sent a separate message expressing disappointment that things had reached this stage, though he stopped short of offering any concrete solution. The tension escalated when bank statements arrived, showing the mortgage payment I had covered for years was now overdue. Nicholas called me one evening, his voice strained as he explained that the lender had contacted them about missed installments. Samantha joined the call on speaker, stating firmly that this sudden withdrawal left them unable to cover the full amount on short notice. She addressed Nicholas directly during the conversation, saying, "Nicholas, we need to find another way because this change is too abrupt." Susan overheard part of the discussion and stepped in, pleading with both sides to find common ground before matters worsened. Samantha responded to her mother-in-law by saying, "Susan, we've already explained our position clearly. Continuing the old pattern isn't sustainable." I reminded them during that call that the original understanding had always included the expectation of eventual repayment once they stabilized. Mr. Thompson advised filing a civil claim in Boise District Court to recover the funds, citing the bank records and email correspondence as strong evidence. I authorized him to proceed with the lawsuit, providing all transaction histories and the informal notes from when I first helped secure the house. Court proceedings began several weeks later in a modest courtroom downtown. Nicholas and Samantha appeared with their attorney, presenting arguments that the contributions were familial support without formal loan terms. Their lawyer emphasized the emotional context of family assistance after our father's passing. Mr. Thompson countered by presenting clear documentation of transfers labeled as advances, along with my consistent role in covering the mortgage to prevent foreclosure. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully, noting the large sums involved and the lack of any written waiver of repayment. Samantha testified briefly, maintaining that the help had been given freely and that demanding it back now felt punitive. She referred to Nicholas as Nicholas when discussing their joint financial situation and addressed Susan's presence in the courtroom by noting her mother-in-law's difficult position. Nicholas supported her statements, describing how the sudden change had disrupted their budgeting and Ethan's routine. Susan was called as a witness and spoke quietly about her attempts to keep peace, though she avoided taking sides directly. Kayla provided supporting testimony about the visible sacrifices made over the years. The judge ultimately ruled in my favor, determining that the payments constituted recoverable financial assistance rather than unconditional gifts. The court ordered Nicholas and Samantha to repay the full amount according to a structured plan, including interest at the state minimum rate. Additional penalties applied for the missed mortgage payments that had accrued. Samantha's expression remained composed during the reading of the verdict, but her silence afterward spoke volumes. Nicholas looked visibly shaken as they left the courtroom. In the months that followed the judgment, the practical consequences unfolded rapidly. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on the house after continued missed payments. Nicholas and Samantha received notices requiring them to vacate the property within 60 days. Their credit scores dropped significantly due to the delinquent accounts, making it difficult to secure new financing. Samantha contacted me once more through email stating that the outcome had created severe financial strain and asking if any compromise remained possible. Nicholas sent a separate note expressing regret over how events had escalated but stopped short of accepting full responsibility. Susan watched the developments with quiet sorrow, occasionally trying to speak with her younger son about finding a path forward. Kayla supported the legal process, fully helping me organize additional records when needed. I focused on separating my own finances, completely transferring the title arrangements, and ensuring no further obligations remained. The house that I had worked years to secure now stood as a symbol of the broken trust that had surfaced that night at the memorial party. The chapter felt heavy but final as the legal process concluded. The court order brought immediate and concrete changes to the household dynamics. Within days of the judgment, the bank sent formal foreclosure notices to the address in Boise. Nicholas and Samantha received multiple letters outlining the timeline for repayment or vacating the property. Susan received copies as well, since her name still appeared on some older documents, causing her visible anxiety during evening conversations. I reviewed the paperwork with Mr. Thompson, confirming that the structured repayment plan left little room for further delays. Nicholas attempted one last direct conversation in the living room one afternoon. He explained that the credit damage had already made it impossible to refinance or find alternative housing quickly. Samantha stood beside him, her posture rigid as she addressed the situation. She turned to Susan first and said, "Susan, this ruling is going to force us out of the only stable home Ethan has known." Then she looked toward me and stated that the full repayment amount plus penalties would take years to manage on their current salaries. Nicholas added that the stress was affecting his performance at work, with his sales numbers dropping due to the distraction. Samantha reinforced his point by saying Nicholas needs time to recover professionally before we can even begin tackling this debt. Kayla, who had come over that day, listened without interrupting at first. When Samantha finished, Kayla responded by reminding them that the original contributions had been made with the understanding of eventual independence. Susan tried to mediate again, suggesting a smaller monthly amount that everyone could live with, but Samantha shook her head and replied, "Susan, even that would stretch us too thin right now." Her tone remained controlled but carried clear frustration when she referred to her husband as Nicholas while discussing their limited options. The moving process began in earnest 2 weeks later. Nicholas rented a small truck and started packing belongings from the garage and spare rooms. Samantha organized boxes in the living room, labeling them efficiently while directing Ethan to sort his toys. The boy asked repeated questions about where they would live next, his confusion evident as he watched his parents dismantle the familiar space. Susan helped pack kitchen items with trembling hands, occasionally pausing to wipe her eyes. I stayed out of the packing areas, focusing instead on separating utility accounts and updating property records. By the end of the 60-day notice period, the house stood nearly empty of their possessions. Nicholas and Samantha loaded the final boxes into the truck under gray Idaho skies. Samantha paused near the front door and looked back at the living room one last time before stepping outside. Nicholas secured the truck bed and climbed into the driver's seat without saying goodbye. They drove away toward a modest 2-bedroom apartment they had found on the south side of Boise, an older complex with basic amenities and significantly higher monthly rent relative to their income. The financial fallout continued unfolding over the following months. Their credit scores dropped further as the foreclosure process advanced, affecting Nicholas's ability to secure better employment opportunities. Samantha took on part-time evening work at a local retail store to supplement their income, but the added hours left little time for family routines. Ethan transferred to a new elementary school closer to the apartment, losing contact with many of his previous friends and soccer teammates. Utility bills and medical co-pays began piling up, creating constant pressure that Susan heard about during occasional phone calls. I received regular updates from Mr. Thompson on the repayment enforcement. The court assigned a small monthly garnishment from Nicholas's paycheck, but the amount barely covered the accumulating interest. Samantha sent one final email requesting a temporary pause in collections due to their housing transition, addressing Nicholas in the message when describing their joint hardship. I forwarded the request to my attorney without response. Susan visited the new apartment a few times, returning each time with stories of cramped spaces and strained conversations. Kayla accompanied her on one occasion and later told me quietly that the environment felt tense and far removed from the stability the house in Boise had once provided. I listened but offered no suggestions for reconciliation. The legal separation of finances had created a clean break that I intended to maintain fully. Through it all, I continued my work at the construction firm with renewed focus. Projects that once felt secondary now became opportunities to rebuild my own savings and long-term plans. The house remained in my name after the title adjustments, providing a stable base for Susan and Kayla whenever they chose to stay. The contrast between my situation and the difficulties Nicholas and Samantha now faced served as a constant reminder of the choices made that night at the memorial party. The consequences had become undeniably real for everyone involved. The apartment on the south side of Boise became their new reality in the months after the move. Nicholas continued working his sales route with reduced commissions while dealing with the wage garnishment ordered by the court. Samantha balanced her part-time retail shifts with caring for Ethan, whose adjustment to the new school remained difficult. The smaller space forced daily compromises, shared bedrooms, limited storage, and constant awareness of tight budgets. Susan visited them twice more, each time returning home quieter than before, mentioning only brief updates about Ethan's schoolwork and the rising rent. Kayla accompanied her on the final visit and later described the atmosphere as one of ongoing strain without any sign of resolution. I made the decision clear during a short phone call with Susan. There would be no further financial assistance, no loans, and no returning to the previous arrangement. When Nicholas reached out once through text asking if any discussion remained possible, I replied with a single sentence confirming that the matter was closed. Samantha sent no additional messages after the court proceedings ended. Their silence spoke louder than any words could have. The family ties that once defined my daily responsibilities had been severed completely by the choices made that night at the memorial party. The house in Boise gradually returned to a quieter rhythm. Susan kept her routines in the kitchen and garden, while Kayla spent more evenings with us, sometimes staying in her old room on weekends. We shared simple meals without the underlying pressure of supporting additional households. I resumed projects I had set aside for years, upgrading the backyard patio, taking occasional weekend hikes in the nearby foothills, and even considering a certification course at the local community college to advance my engineering career. For the first time in 15 years, my decision centered on my own future rather than carrying everyone else. Ethan turned 9 that spring. I sent a card and a small gift through Susan, but made no effort to visit the apartment. Nicholas and Samantha faced continued challenges with their credit and housing stability, occasionally falling behind on rent according to the limited information that reached me. The foreclosure process on the original house concluded formally removing any remaining legal connections. I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties, only a steady acceptance that boundaries had become necessary. Looking back at the events that began with the memorial birthday party, one truth stands out clearly. When family members treat long-term support as an entitlement rather than a temporary bridge, the relationship shifts from care to burden. The public betrayal that evening revealed how easily gratitude can turn into expectation. By choosing to stop the one-sided contributions and enforcing the repayment through proper channels, I protected not only my financial future but also my peace of mind. Susan still hopes for some form of reconnection, but I have made my position final. Kayla understands completely and stands with the decision to move forward separately. The three of us now share the house with the calm that had been missing for years. There are no more urgent requests for extra funds, no late-night discussions about covering shortfalls, and no underlying resentment from carrying an unbalanced load. This experience taught me that true family strength comes from mutual respect, not one person's endless sacrifice. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to step back completely when that respect disappears. I no longer wonder what might have happened if I had continued giving without limits. The path I chose after that night has allowed me to rebuild on solid ground for myself, for Susan, and for Kayla. The truth that emerged at my father's memorial birthday party forced a necessary ending. And in that ending, I finally found the freedom to live for my own future